Last week, former Vice President Biden released his presidential tax plan. I wish he would release his list of people he's going to put on the Supreme Court like he said he was going to do in June. He hasn't done that, and I think yesterday he said he wasn't going to do it. But we do have his high tax plan. He vowed to raise taxes immediately on U.S. businesses, even though our country is recovering from a worse economic crisis since the Great Depression. And usually when you're in that economic condition, you don't raise taxes. But the very last thing struggling Americans need, and particularly the businesses that create the jobs, is a massive tax increase at this time. Of course, Mr. Biden's tax plan shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. That party seems to think the answer to every problem in America is raising taxes and spending more money. When he was vice president, the U.S. corporate tax rate was the highest in the industrialized world. It isn't now because of President Trump's tax proposals and the bill that we got passed December 2017. U.S. companies weren't competitive with their foreign counterparts prior to the recent tax legislation. And there were constant headlines all the time about companies moving their headquarters overseas, largely because of our outdated tax system. In fact, a number of Mr. Biden's proposals make me think that he's reliving his time as vice president, because during those 8 years, his plan to increase the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28 would very quickly take us back to those days. Once again, this country would be saddled with the highest business tax rates in the industrialized world, taking into account federal and state taxes in this country. U.S. companies, both large and small, would see higher taxes than their foreign competitors in France, Germany, the UK, and other major trading partners. In some cases, those taxes would be as much as 15 percentage points higher. Mr. Biden says our tax system encourages offshoring, profit shifting, and inversions. And back when he was vice president, those things actually happened. Offshoring, profit shifting, and inversions. But that's no longer true since we passed the Tax Cut and Jobs Act December 2017. When Mr. Biden was vice president, the U.S. tax law allowed companies to defer their foreign earnings until they were brought back to the United States. Why would you bring them back when we have the highest tax rate in the history of the country? Setting in some bank overseas, they're not taxed at that rate until the money comes home. That system allowed many companies then to delay paying any tax on their foreign earnings, and in some cases, that could be indefinitely. As part of tax reform, we specifically sought to end the parking of profits overseas. We wanted that money to come home because that money being invested in this country would create jobs. So that's why we enacted the tax on global intangible low tax income, or GILTI as it's referred to, the acronym, which imposes a minimum tax on foreign earnings in low tax countries. And when Biden was vice president, there were plenty of opportunities for what we call base erosion. In other words, incentives to park the money overseas. That's why we created then the Base Erosion Anti-Abuse Tax, or the acronym BEAT, which targets deductible payments made to foreign affiliates. We also impose limits on the deductibility of interest. Together, these policies addressed loopholes so companies can't erode the U.S. tax base and avoid taxes. While tax reform cracked down on notable abuses, it also had the positive effect made in the United States here a far more attractive place to invest, not only for those profits in this country coming home, but for foreign investment as well in America. We created the Foreign-Derived Intangible Income rules to incentivize companies to keep intellectual property in this country, not abroad. We also allowed immediate expensing of investments to encourage companies to put their facilities and jobs here on U.S. soil. And President Trump has gone way beyond even what the tax laws have provided as an incentive to get industry back here. Now, Mr. Biden may be harking back to 2014, but let's all remember that companies then were announcing, leaving left and right, their plans to invert or move their headquarters overseas. But since our 2017 Trump tax reform, I haven't heard any of those companies with inversion plans. Quite the opposite. Companies have called off inversions and even brought back operations to this country, and they are citing our tax reform as the main reason for doing it. So why would Mr. Biden want to undo that? Even more curious is that Mr. Biden's own talking points suggest that he supports a number of our tax reform policies in that 2017 bill. We have Kimberly Clausing, who reportedly advising Mr. Biden on tax policy, has said the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, quote, should be commended for providing some limits on tax avoidance through the GILTI and the BEAT, end of quote. And GILTI and BEAT are those acronyms I've referred to. What's more, Ms. Clausing has estimated that the new rules under the 2017 tax bill will result in a 20% decrease in shifting profits overseas. That's consistent with the Joint Committee on Taxation's macroeconomic estimate in 2017 that found tax reform would reduce profit shifting and increase the U.S. tax base. Nevertheless, however, Mr. Biden wants to double down on increasing taxes on U.S. businesses and, in fact, undo the progress that we've seen since tax reform in 2017. In addition to higher taxes on domestic earning, he also wants to increase the rate on U.S. companies' foreign earnings to 21%. That's almost double the 12.5% rate that the OECD is targeting for its global minimum tax. I guess the former vice president wants to ensure that no country can top the United States when it comes to the highest tax rates possible. And that's not all. Mr. Biden proposes an additional 10% penalty on goods and services imported by U.S. companies from foreign affiliates. Now, even the Washington Post editorial board noted earlier this month the Vice President Biden's policy simply ignores the reality of the global supply chains. Do we, in fact, really want to encourage foreign countries to tax goods and services imported from the United States? That could be a slippery slope. The truth is, Mr. Biden is trying to fix problems from the last administration. Republicans already met that challenge, and tax reform of 2017 is working. Data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis clearly shows that tax reform stemmed the flood of offshoring while encouraging U.S. companies to invest right here in the United States. In fact, among the U.S. multinational employment, investment, research, and production in the United States has increased at a faster rate in 2018 than the average rate over the past 20 years, faster than the growth rate of U.S. multinational companies that are abroad. Of course, there's more work to be done, and tax reform made this country a more attractive place for business to headquarter, invest, and create. Now, if the former Vice President succeeds in his plans, it won't just be our businesses that will bear the brunt. The Joint Committee on Taxation and Congressional Budget Office have both concluded that the 25% of the corporate tax is borne by workers, so workers will be hurt. They will also feel then the burden of the Biden plan through fewer jobs, through reduced wages, and through less benefits. Above all, the Biden tax plan ignores the reality of today, and that's what the tax bill of 2017 was supposed to accomplish, bring our tax laws into the modern world of business, undoing the progress that we've made through tax reform, especially now, is certainly not a prescription for our economic recovery and growth. We're trying to see our way out of the global pandemic. Another reason for not trying something different than what we have going right now. What's more, the Vice President's plan will do nothing to speed the progress that we made in reducing unemployment since the height of that pandemic. Instead, it'll do just the opposite, work against it. The Biden tax increases wouldn't be good policy in the best of conditions, but they're certainly bad policy right now because of the economic hardships because of the virus pandemic. If Mr. Biden really wants to keep living in the Obama era, he should recall President Obama's sound advice on tax policy during a crisis, the financial crisis of 2009 and 10, when President Obama said this, and I quote, "The last thing you want to do is raise taxes in the middle of a recession," end of quote. That's something we should all be able to agree upon. I yield the floor.